Investor Intelligence provides general information only. You should consider seeking independent advice to see how this information relates to your unique circumstances. Please refer to the terms and conditions available at investorintelligence.com.au for more.
Welcome to this week's episode of Investor Intelligence, your weekly podcast on all things investment, hosted by me, Jacob Kearns. Today I have back with me once again Luke Harris, the CEO of the Property Mentors. Welcome back, Luke.
Thanks, Jacob. Good to be back.
We're going to be going through some of our audience's most frequently asked questions. So our first question is from Andrew from Bundura. He has asked, how much money do I need to get started in property?
Look, that's a really good question. How much do you need? It's like saying how long's a piece of string, really, I guess. How much do we need? Depends on really where do we want to buy, how much do we want to spend. Typically, as a very blanket sort of rule, you're going to need a 10 or 20% deposit for that property. Now, it depends on your, obviously, borrowing power and your serviceability and what the banks will lend you, assuming you are borrowing to buy property, which most people do. If you want to invest in property in cash, then you'll need the full purchase price. But for most people, 10 or 20% deposit is what you're going to need, and obviously you're servicing for the rest of the loan. So you will need to be able to get a loan. So you need to be working, you need to have a business or some form of income that the banks will rely on.
Okay, so 10 or 20% of the value of the property. How much is the going price for a decent property these days?
Well, decent property can depend on what market you're in. Obviously, we're looking at Australia. We're not looking at any overseas markets or any other countries per se. But in Australia, you can still buy properties for $300,000 to $400,000 that can make good investments. So based on that, you can get into the market with $30,000 or $40,000, $50,000. It depends on obviously your appetite for buying in areas that you don't live in. A lot of people, when they're starting out investing, they want to buy in the suburb that they live in, and that could be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 or more, and that might not necessarily be the best investment for them as well. So making sure that you actually understand why you're buying the property can determine where you buy the property as well.
Yeah, and of course your income will reflect your borrowing capacity. Is there a minimum income that you'd aim for?
Well, it'd be nice for everybody to aim for $100,000 or $200,000, which the banks would love. But look, we've got many of our members that are on $60,000, $70,000 a year, single income, and that they're out there investing in property. So It's absolutely possible. It's not really so much dependent on how much you make. It does help if you make more, but it's not dependent on how much you make. It's also how much you spend. We've got people that have been members for some time and they're earning $200,000 or $300,000 a year, but they spend $200,000 or $300,000 a year or more. And so everything that they make, they're spending. Whereas we've got our members that are on $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, and they save a lot of their money and they don't waste it. And they don't have, Netflix, Disney, Uber Eats, all of these extra things coming out of their bank account because they're more savvy with their money. So often we find that people that have got less income are more savvy with their money, and therefore they can actually service more debt for property and they can build their portfolios faster because they've got better money habits.
Yeah. Aside from developing better money habits, if you're looking to get your deposit as soon as possible, what are some things you could do to get there?
One of the things you could do to get there, as soon as possible would be to really cut out things, extra subscriptions. Look at your bank accounts. A lot of people don't actually know what they've subscribed to. They subscribed to a free trial 2 years ago and they've gone into a monthly payment plan and they're paying for some subscription to something that they don't use, or it's coming out of their bank account, and I just wonder why there's no money in the bank every week or fortnight. It's because there's subscriptions to things that they've signed up for online, and it's more common than you think. You think, oh, well, I'd be across that. I'd know what's coming out of my bank account. A lot of people actually don't know what's coming out of their account. So go through your account and cancel any subscriptions that you don't need. If you've got 3 or 4 TV subscriptions, use your friend's account. I've got plenty of people on our on our Netflix account that use our Netflix and other things like that. So make sure you've got good money habits. If you want to get there as quickly as possible, make sure you're saving at least 10% of what you earn. Just get in the habit of doing that. 10% of whatever comes into your pay packet or your business, put it away. As soon as it hits the bank account, put it into a separate account that's locked away. Have those money habits locked in. Save money where you can, but also look at opportunities to make more money so that you're, I guess, looking at both ends of it. So you're looking to make more money and also save money at the other end, because you can't really save your way to wealth. At some point, you need to make more money.
Yeah.
Because whenever you're on a fixed income, you can save as much as you like, but unless you're trying to find ways to make more money, it's going to take a lot longer. So if you want to get there as quickly as possible, sometimes you've got to bite the bullet and, take on a second job, go and do some Uber deliveries or whatever it might be, or whatever it is, get creative, find a way to get a second income or even a third income. And it might only be for 1 or 2 years. And at 1 or 2 years, you have 2 jobs or 3 jobs. Look, it depends on how badly you want those goals at the end and how much you want to get into the property market.
Yeah, well, it definitely sounds like it's achievable on an average sort of income. Our next question is Jane from Wollongong. She has read your book, Let's Get Real, and has asked, you speak about taking your emotion out of your investing. How do you do that when you're dealing with such large sums of money? That's
a really good question, actually. I think because you're dealing with large amounts of money, that's the number one reason you should take the emotion out of it. Look, if you're going into Kmart or if you're going into Myer to buy some clothes, or, I was going to say a CD then. If you're going to buy something for your house, like some homewares, right, you want to buy something that you do have an emotional connection to. You want to buy something that looks good and feels good. You want to buy some new towels or sheets. 100%, that's all based on emotion, right? Because you want it to look nice in your house. You want to see it and touch it and feel it. Investment is not there for that purpose. So, how to take the emotion out of investing is to really, before you even start investing or consider investing, is why am I doing it? I'm doing it to make money and to set myself up for the future. So because of that, I need to take the emotion out of it. So before you start looking at property, before you even talk to a mortgage broker or anything like that, understand why you're doing it. You're doing it to invest, and investing inherently has risks, and it has things that can go right and things that can go wrong. Because of that, you need to get your emotions in check. Right, so I guess the question really is, how do I take the emotion out of investing when you're dealing with large amounts of money? Well, because you're dealing with large amounts of money, emotion's going to get in the way. So you need to make sure right up front that you're aware of the fact that your emotions could derail your investing. So if you're aware of that up front, you can address it and go, if something happens with my emotions, am I able to push those to the side and deal with the facts and figures in front of me and make investment decisions, business decisions about my investments rather than emotional decisions?
Yeah.
Right. So addressing it up front and being aware of the fact that you can't let your emotions dictate, then yeah, of course you're going to have your emotions, right? You're going to look at something, you're going to look at a property, or you're going to consider an investment or an area, and the emotions are going to creep in. You're a human being. That's what happens, right? But you've got to make sure that you don't necessarily take them out of investing, because it's probably never going to happen. You're going to take them away altogether, but also just be aware of your emotions when you are investing.
That's a good point. And you mentioned doing the numbers before you invest. Is there anything else outside of that, such as, making sure you've done the right research that would help with taking those emotions out?
Well, absolutely. And it's making sure that you have got the research and the due diligence on any property that you're looking at. You understand the vacancy rates, you understand days on market, you understand the growth rates, infrastructure spending, access to shops and schools and other infrastructure in the area. So all of these things absolutely need to come into it. And the better you understand your research and due diligence as an investor, the more chance you're going to be comfortable with the emotional aspect, because you know that you're making that decision based on proper data and proper research and proper fundamentals before you sign any contracts or apply for a loan. Okay, because the emotions are less likely to creep in when you've got that knowledge base behind you, because you know you're making a good decision.
Yeah.
Here at The Property Mentors, we have decades of experience investing in property. We know what to look for and what kind of impact it can have on your portfolio. We have access to brokers, accountants, and property managers to make sure your portfolio performs. Visit thepropertymentors.com.au to learn more.
Our next question is from myself. I've heard from you and other people around the team that when you're investing in a property, it should fit into your portfolio like a piece fits into a jigsaw puzzle. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad you've asked that question. When we're talking about fitting a property into the portfolio like a jigsaw puzzle, I think a lot of people do what I did during my 20s. When I was in my 20s, I bought, and a lot of people know my story, I went and bought a house as my first property, and then I went and bought an apartment, and then I went and bought a development site. I did a land subdivision, I bought in a mining town, I bought off the plan. And through that, I was jumping from different property strategy to property strategy because they're all different property types. And what I was doing was looking for what I felt at the time was a good investment. And at the end of the day, I was buying those properties in isolation from the rest of the portfolio. So when you're looking at building your portfolio, you need to look at it like a jigsaw puzzle and know what the end picture looks like. Right? Have you ever tried to do a jigsaw puzzle without the box? Right? The box is what you're aiming for. That's the end goal, right? If somebody just gave you a bag full of jigsaw pieces, you wouldn't even know what you're trying to create, right? You've got 1,000 pieces there, ages 2 and up, right? It takes 2 to 5 years to do it. You don't actually know what you're trying to aim for. So when you've got the box, you go, oh, look, I'm trying to build this scenery here, or I'm trying to build this, it's a cat or whatever it might be. And then you can put all the puzzle pieces together based on that picture. Same thing with your portfolio. Unless you know what the end outcome looks like, it's going to be hard to slot the jigsaw puzzle pieces in together. So understanding what that end goal looks like, understanding what the cover of the jigsaw box looks like, helps you to put the right pieces in there. If you did have a bag full of jigsaw puzzle pieces and you tried to put it together, you might try and squeeze pieces in there that don't fit. And it's the same thing, like I said, with my portfolio during my 20s. I was going out there and buying a whole lot of property. Now, I never lost money on a property, still managed to make some good decisions, but there was no strategy behind it. There was no jigsaw puzzle box. So I didn't know what I was aiming for other than making money. When you narrow that down and you actually understand what the big picture looks like, then all of the jigsaw puzzle pieces, all of the properties, and all of the decisions that you make are based on that end goal. So whenever you look at a property, you can see how it fits into the portfolio rather than just going, I like this one, I'm going to try and squeeze it in.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have a specific purpose in the portfolio. So when it has a specific purpose, it can help you to build the portfolio further.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that a lot of people will say, I don't want apartments, or I don't want this, or I have to buy in this area, or I don't want to buy in that area. What happens once you've started building your portfolio, once you get to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 properties, it becomes less about the properties and more about the strategy. And we're going to do a whole podcast on this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's quite a detailed concept. But the reality is that once you start getting to a certain tax position and you start getting your portfolio to a certain leverage position with the banks, then the property selection becomes really important because we're not specifically looking for the best property. We might be looking for a property that's going to help our tax position. We might be looking for a property that's going to help our cash flow position. All of these things combined are going to help us to choose the next one and the one after that and the one after that. So this is where you need to get more strategic with your accountant and your broker so that the property selection is going to help you to build your portfolio rather than getting what we think is the perfect property. Because often people will think I have to have this type of property only, whereas sometimes you might find I've recently bought a 1-bedroom apartment, which helps me to grow the portfolio further because it allows me to get better tax benefits off that brand new apartment, and the rent versus the debt on that property is going to cover the mortgage repayments. So these sorts of things can actually help you to grow the portfolio when you actually understand why.
Okay. Off that, I'm not really sure if this is the best question to ask, but once you've done your strategy and you've got your goals, how can you work out how a property will actually perform for you and what yield should you be looking for?
Okay, that's a good question. I think we use a software program called Augur Investor. We can put a link to the website on the podcast notes, but I think Augur Investor allows us to put in all of the property data. So what our rates are, what our rent's going to be, what our interest rates are going to be, all of the property figures, because every property is going to have the same set of figures. You're going to have expenses and income on that property. So we can input all of that data. The next thing that we can do is put all of the investor's position in there. So what's your income? What's your tax position? All of that links up to the ATO. So we're getting current ATO data. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to do forecasting. That's what Augur is. It's a forecasting tool to do forecasting 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years into the future to see what that property portfolio is going to look like and what any individual property is going to look like. So if you're comparing property A, B or C, you can do the figures on all 3 of those properties and you can work out which one's going to perform the best for you. So obviously there's always unknowns when it comes to investing. We don't know for sure what any growth rate's going to be or what any yield's going to be. It is going to vary from time to time depending on market conditions and interest rates and all sorts of things. But if we're looking at 3 properties on today, for example, at least we're comparing them side by side with the data we've got in front of us. When it comes to, I guess, yield, what yield we should be aiming for, in most cases, you want the highest yield possible, but that's not always the case when it comes to investing because we've got to look at the type of property that we're buying, whether we can finance that property, whether it helps us financially or hinders us financially. Some properties might have a great yield, but also to offset that, you might have more repairs and maintenance costs. You might have higher council rates or other fees involved. So we need to factor in all of these things combined. When we're looking at a net yield, of course, we want to factor in your tax position as well. So this is where we need to loop in your accountant, make sure your broker's across it. Really, when you're looking at a capital city, your properties could be anywhere from 2 to 3.5%. Regional markets, you could be anywhere from 3 to 6%. And I guess when you're looking at higher yields, 7, 8, 9, 10%, you're talking about dual occupancies and other types of developments as well.
Yeah, and often people get really attracted to those dual occupancies and higher yields. What can you speak of about that?
Well, look, I think you do need to be careful. We've spoken about that in my book, Property Fit, and specifically things like Airbnb type properties and things like that. People assume that they're a higher yield, which means they're a better investment. Dual occupancies, when you've got 2 separate properties, there's no issue with that, but sometimes they're built under the same roof line, which means you can't sell off the second half of the house because it's all attached together. It might be on the same title. Okay. There's other property strategies like NDIS, for example, where people are building disability homes and things like that, which are fantastic. They offer some great returns, but the problem is that the banks don't love them. So you might have to put more of your own capital in to actually buy one of those. And of course, if you need to sell it in the future, the secondary market for that is very small. So you need to sell it to another investor that wants to buy an NDIS property. Yes, it might have a higher yield, but you've got to factor all of these things in. And so yield isn't necessarily the golden goose that's going to provide all of these magical benefits for you. There's a word I'm looking for there. Look, I think the yield is important, but I think getting a balanced portfolio is more important so that you can continue to grow it. You've got to look at the growth of your portfolio. If you've got a couple of properties in there that might be, I guess, a little bit left of field, the banks don't necessarily love that type of asset. So if you're relying on Airbnb income, if you've got NDIS properties which have bigger deposits, maybe a higher yield, you've got to factor all of that in and also consider what the banks are going to look at. So if you want to go and buy more properties after buying those, the banks may not consider all of that income because it's not deemed to be within their safe zone.
Yeah.
Okay, because they like a normal tenant on a long-term lease for 12 months or more and just pays the rent every month. And they want to see the same amount coming in. Banks are quite conservative. But in saying that, there are plenty of people that have gone out there and they've made Airbnb portfolios and they've made NDIS portfolios and other sorts of strategies. They've made them work very well. So it's not to say they don't work, but it just means that because it's a more niche strategy, it's going to vary for each investor, whether you've got the appetite for the varied cash flows.
Yeah, lots of different things you need to be aware of around that as well, as you've discussed on this podcast. Our next question is from Damon in Craigieburn. Should any of the recent changes to tenants' rights be a concern for property investors?
I think personally, no, not at all. And yes, there is changes. Victoria started the lead with changing to tenancy laws and giving tenants more rights. Queensland has followed. New South Wales and WA are all coming in line as well, mostly following Victoria's lead on that. I don't see that is a bad thing. The tenants do have more rights now. I think it's long overdue. And I've said this in previous podcasts as well, where we've spoken about this topic, in that tenants for a long time have not had the rights that they should have, in that landlords have not had to fix certain things that are wrong with the property. Rents have been able to go up at any point in time, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. So what these tenancy regulations have done is they've actually just sort of brought some sort of national standard, even though it's not a national standard per se. A lot of the states are falling in line and having very similar tenancy protections. Queensland and Victoria in particular, you can only put the rent up once a year. So that does control the rent to a certain extent, gives tenants some certainty. Little things like putting picture hooks on the wall and being able to paint a wall and doing minor things like that to make the home more livable are allowed now, and it's becoming more normal for tenants to do that. Again, tenants still have to look after the property and they have to maintain it in a livable way, but tenants now are having more rights when it comes to leasing a property. In Victoria, for example, if you're selling a property and you've got a tenant in there, you need to compensate the tenant for every inspection. So the tenant gets a monetary compensation for the time that you're there. So if you open the property, let's say every Saturday morning for half an hour, the landlord typically has to pay a very small percentage of the rent for that day. Oh, wow. And it might be $30 or $40, but at least there is some sort of compensation for a tenant now, rather than having it open every week and people walking through the property. So those sorts of things are good. What it does actually mean, though, for investors is that a lot of landlords out there, or rental providers, as they're called in Victoria now, a lot of these people that don't want to look after the tenants and they don't want to fix things and they don't want to maintain a minimum standard for the property, they'll just sell the properties and get out. Okay, too hard. I don't want to deal with these laws anymore. I want to put up my rent every 6 months and I can't do that anymore, so I'm going to sell the property. What that does mean is that it's going to weed out a lot of the rubbish in the investment pool. So it doesn't mean that a lot of people are necessarily just going to sell up and get out. We didn't see that in Victoria when these rules came in 18 months ago. But what it is going to mean is that people are going to realise that they have to meet these minimum standards, heating and cooling and cooking and all of these things that tenants have to have the right to have access to. If people aren't prepared to be a responsible landlord or rental provider, then they will just sell and they'll be out of the market. And that leaves a space for, professional investors to treat it like a business, provide good quality rental accommodation, make sure that you're putting up your rent only once a year. And it just brings it into line where you've got a more, a more structured system nationally. And there's more consistency. And I guess it's the whole bar has been lifted.
Yeah.
Right. So from my perspective, I don't see it as a bad thing. I don't see that there's going to be any major changes as far as how it affects my portfolio. And I do think that from a tenant's perspective, it is good that there's some rights. I don't think it's a concern for property investors. If anything, it's a good thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it does definitely sound fair. Final question is, why should I invest in property over other asset classes? And this is from Aaron from Wagga Wagga. Now, of course, we can't give financial advice. So my question for you, Luke, is why did you choose property over everything else?
Well, look, for me, property, I'm like a lot of people in Australia in that I've got an addiction with Bunnings, I have to admit. I love, and I say this after I've just been on leave and I've been renovating a bathroom almost every day for 6 weeks. There was termites in the floor. The walls had to be taken down. It was a mess. Anyway, that's finished. It finished a couple of days ago now. Property is something that you can see and feel and touch, right? You can improve it. You can subdivide it. You can build on it. You can do all sorts of things to property that you can't do with any other asset class. I can't go into buy some BHP shares and go and say, hey, I'd love to come in and just renovate my shares. Or, I want to subdivide my share. You can't do any of that. The other thing that I love so much about property, and the reason why I loved it from a very young age, was that the banks will give you money for it. Right? Now, if banks are going to give me 80 or 90% of the value of the asset, have a think about that. How much of a percentage of that is? You're going to get a block of chocolate and you take 90% off and go, the bank's going to pay for that part of it. That's a pretty good deal, right? Or get a cake, you chop 10% off and go, okay, that's my contribution. The bank's going to cover the rest. That's pretty good, right? If the banks are going to cover that, what does that actually tell you about the underlying asset, right? The underlying asset is a solid investment if the banks are prepared to put up to 90% of the money, sometimes 95%. And for first home buyers, sometimes you can go up to 97 or 98% of the purchase price. The banks are happy to support it. So if the banks are going to put most of the money in, why would I not use their money? Right. So from a very young age, I learned that using other people's money and, in a sense, using the bank's money to build wealth is a very smart way of building wealth. And for me, it made sense. Like a lot of people in Australia, it made sense to buy property because I can drive past it. I've got properties that I've never seen before. So I don't drive past them, but I can if I want to. And it's a really powerful thing. And again, I've learned, over this last 23, 24 years of investing in property now, I've learned that it is just something that you just have to be consistent with, hold on to the properties, build your portfolio, and it works if you work the system. If you work the system that's allowed, use your tax benefits, speak to your accountant, speak to your broker, make sure you've got a good team of people behind you, do your research. Property is a fantastic asset class. Where it goes wrong for people and why property doesn't work for some people is they buy and sell. They're buying and selling and chopping and changing, or they change their mind. They buy a property and then 1 or 2 years later, they change their mind. They want to go do something else, or they don't like that property anymore, or they just want to go do something else. That's why property doesn't work, right? If you're chopping and changing, and again, this all comes back to the earlier question about emotions. If your emotions get in the way, not just with a single purchase, but with your overall strategy, it can really ruin your portfolio.
Yeah. So having that long-term mindset definitely helps.
It's taken, I heard this quote a long time ago, it's taken 23 years to become an overnight success, right? Because, well, it's a quote that's just out there. It's taken, Bill Gates or someone like that, where they've said, people think, you've become an overnight success. All of a sudden, you're doing all these things, but it's taken 23 years to get there. So this started many years before I bought my first property. So 23 years ago, I bought my first property. But before that, I was reading positive mindset books. I was reading business books. I was learning about money. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was about 17, right? So, a lot of this education happened before the money.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to do it the other way, where they want to just go out there and get started. And again, we talked about this in my first book, Let's Get Real. And we talked about the different investor types, and a lot of investors just want to get out there and get started, and they don't want to worry about all this education stuff. They'll learn that as they go. Right?
Yeah.
If you had all the education up front, you'd make better decisions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's pros and cons. It's great that they're going out and investing. I was the same, I still am to a degree, but yeah, it's obviously important to become educated.
Well, yeah, and look, I said this in Let's Get Real. You're going to get the education one way or another. You're either going to get the education up front and you're going to pay a fee to learn from people that have done it before, and you're going to read books and listen to podcasts like this, and you're going to get that education, and you're going to do that before you put your money in the marketplace. That way you're making better informed decisions. The other way to do it is you go and put your money in the marketplace, win or lose, roll the dice, see how it goes. You're going to get an education, you're going to learn from that experience, right? You're going to go, hey, that was great, I made some money, or you're going to lose some money and you're going to learn from that. The problem with that is you're going to get the education one way or another. You're either going to pay it up front and you're going to know that you're going to get the education, or you're going to invest your money and see what happens. The problem is, even if you make money in that scenario, how do you replicate it?
Okay.
Because you may not know what you actually did to make it work.
Yeah.
You might have just got lucky. So it's very hard to be able to replicate that. And the problem that we always say with investing is you can always make money, but you can't get the time back. And you need time to build long-term wealth. So it's better to get the education up front, know what you're doing, know why you're doing it, and then go out there and make good decisions, because the longer you're in the market for, you're going to get that compounding growth that you need with property.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to add, Luke?
Look, go out there and invest. There's a really, really good time in the market right now with interest rates are starting to stabilise. I think we're in for a really positive next year, 2024. Can't believe we're saying 2024 already. It seems like just a minute ago it was 2020. But yeah, look, next year I think we're in for a really good time for the property markets. With the interest rates are tipped to start reducing a little bit in the first half of the year, which we'll start seeing more movement in the property market again. And a lot more of that media sentiment will turn from really negative, as it has been this year, into more of a positive sentiment. And I think, look, fantastic time is to be getting in the market now. Waiting for the perfect day or the perfect time or the perfect interest rates or the perfect property just doesn't happen. So my advice to anybody listening to the podcast is to get started. If you're just thinking about getting started, have a chat to one of our mentor team, and ask the questions that you need to and get started, because no one's going to do it for you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming back on.
Great, thanks, Jake.
If you found this episode or any of our episodes helpful, please make sure to share and leave a rating to help us reach more people on their investing journeys. And of course, subscribe to be notified when new episodes drop. Make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at Investor Intelligence Podcast. You can find links to our other socials in the show notes, including a link to the Property Mentors weekly blog. If you're ready to get your property portfolio in shape for financial freedom, check out Luke's latest book, Property Fit. You can get yourself a copy at www.propertyfitbook.com.au.